Hi, boys and girls, and welcome to your Read Aloud. I think I told you yesterday about how we were going to be talking about some of our nation's history. And we talked a little bit about some of the beginnings of time in the world and how all of this area was pretty populated. There were a lot of people there. And that how in the North American and the South American continents, there were a bunch of people living here, but they just weren't real connected yet. All kinds of countries over here, they're closer, so they're trading, meaning that, these people might raise wheat and these people might raise sheep, and they come together and say, hey, I'll give you a bunch of wheat for some of your sheep. They kind of knew about each other. But in the Americas, those countries were relatively unknown. That doesn't mean that there weren't people who had traveled there, but people didn't really know about each other, so they were very separated by the ocean. The Atlantic on this side and the Pacific on this side. Because if you think about it, it wraps around. Now, I want to go ahead today, and I just want to bring up my United States map. We're going to focus in on our country today. You're going to notice that this is probably one of my very favorite things. I am really into history, and I do research about my family history a lot. It's one of my favorite things to read about. When I'm at home, I read a lot of history novels, so books that teach me about history. But Native American history is probably one of my most favorite things to read about. And I actually got these books that I'm reading to you. I really kind of got a bunch of them back when I was still in college learning to be a teacher, because my partners and I did a unit in a fourth grade class about Native American legends, and so it's one of my favorite things. And last time we got together, we read The Gift of the Sacred Dog, which was about how Native Americans ended up getting horses, which helped them. And we knew that horses are not native, they're not from the United States, that they came when the Spaniards, the people from Spain, came over to the Americas. They brought horses with them. And when we were talking on Monday, I guess it wasn't yesterday, it would be 2 days ago now, we were talking about Native American tribes that live in the middle of the country. We're in Indiana. But if you drive west a little bit, you hit this part of the country called the Plains. Now, I don't mean planes like, flying in the sky. I mean plains like flat land. When you start driving west and you hit countries like Kansas, you will drive a flat, straight line forever until you get to the mountains where they start to get hilly again. It is very, very flat in Kansas and Nebraska and this area here. Has lots and lots of grasslands and not as many trees. And so those tribes were reliant upon the buffalo, and they used the buffalo for their clothing, their food, and their shelter. Their teepees had buffalo hide around the outside. It'd be very hard to just go out and build a house there. There aren't a lot of trees, and at the time, it would have taken a lot of work to have brought a bunch of logs from another part of the country. The United States is divided into different areas based on our different landscapes. Here in Indiana, we have very hot summers, we have very cold winters. The top of our state is pretty flat, but when you get down to where we live, we've got lots of rolling hills down here. Every place is different. If you go out to Arizona, New Mexico, you hit deserts. If you're in Florida, you've got ocean around you. Imagine if you were somebody who lived right on the ocean. What do you think you might eat? Fish, clams, different things that come from the ocean. Whatever you eat and however you live is really dependent upon the place that you live. My family is all from Kentucky, and Kentucky has very fertile land, and they came there at an early time before there were a lot of people there. So They built their home and they farmed. I mean, they were basically farmers. For the most part, that was what their job was. They farmed and raised food, and a lot of that was to support their families. But there are other people that had different jobs and did different things. Well, the Native Americans, their lifestyles were very different too. I want to read to you a story today that comes from the Pacific Northwest, which, if you get up into the state of Alaska, which is right here, Alaska is actually not connected to the 50 states, or the big part of the United States. Let's see if I can show you. If you look at the United States here, on the North American continent, Alaska is connected to Canada. And here's Hawaii. That's also part of the United States. But Alaska is one of our states. It's just not connected to us. Now, I'm going to use my globe here to talk about some things. You guys have probably noticed that when you get home at night, or, well, you're already home. When you're home in the evenings, that after school's over, that it seems to get dark earlier. And when you wake up, it seems like it's staying dark longer. There are 24 hours in a day. And when I say in a day, I mean day and night. So on a Monday, it's 24 hours. It starts at midnight, which is still dark, and it goes throughout the daytime, and it ends the next night at midnight. So 24 hours. Some of that is light, and some of that is dark. And in the winter, our days have less light, and our nights go for longer hours. In the summer, we have more daylight hours and less dark hours. And that seems really confusing, but here's why. This is the sun, right? Well, when the sun is in the sky, the earth travels around the sun in orbit. All planets in our solar system are orbiting or making a sort of oval shape or going around the sun. The sun is the center of our universe. Now the earth makes one circle this way every day. If I'm the sun and I'm over here, here's Europe. It's daytime. But the United States is back here, so it's nighttime for us. But as the earth spins, the sun starts to come up. It's not really coming up, the sun's staying in one place. It's the earth that is spinning around that makes it look like the sun's coming up. So here's the United States. Now the sun is starting to come up in the sky. And then when it gets to this point, the sun is going down. And now we're back here again, and it's dark on our side. When it's daylight in the United States, it's nighttime in Russia and India and other countries. So that's what makes day and night, the earth spinning this way. What makes the seasons, warm, hot, spring, summer, winter, and fall, is the way the earth moves around the sun. So at some points, the earth is tilted this way and the sun is over here. Well, the sun's shining right here, isn't it? It's shining pretty strongly on the bottom part of the earth. But the top part is pointed away. As a matter of fact, the very top part, no sun is hitting it, is it? There's no sun shining. Well, when it's winter up here, it can be dark all day. And then other times of the year, it'll be sun shining right at it. And even though the earth's turning, the sun's still hitting it. So sometimes on the top of the planet, the sun can be up all day, meaning all through the night. And sometimes there's no sunrise. It stays dark all day long. Now that's a little confusing, but it gives you a little bit of understanding of why this story is probably created. Native Americans in the Pacific Northwest, in that area up there, there's not as much sunshine. And then when you get up really far into the north, they may not have any sun at all. And so this story is actually a trickster tale from the Pacific Northwest. And when I say trickster, a lot of Native American legends and stories have, an animal that tricks somebody. And those are usually called trickster tales. And this one's called Raven. Now, when I was younger, I used to watch this show called Northern Exposure all the time. And it took place, the setting of this TV show was in a place called Cicely, Alaska. And in Alaska, there were a lot of Native Americans living there still. There are still Native Americans. They haven't disappeared. We have Native Americans all across the United States and South America and other parts of North America. They are still here. They did not disappear. Thank goodness. But in that show I watched, during the holidays of Christmas, the Native Americans would celebrate the raven. And I think this story and the situation with the sun can be explained by this story. That didn't make sense. This story explains how they felt about the sun and how necessary it is. Now I want you to think about winter and you're living in a cold, dark place. That could be a scary time, huh? Some of this is a little hard to explain, so hopefully you get a little bit. We'll come back and talk about it in a minute. Raven came. All the world was in darkness. The sky above was in darkness. The waters below were in darkness. Men and women lived in the dark and cold. Raven was sad for them. He said, I will search for the light. So if you're living in the north in the winter, the sun is not reaching you. So it sounds like Raven came maybe around winter time. Raven flew across valleys and across mountains. He flew along rivers and over lakes. There was darkness all around. Then he saw a bit of light far away. He flew and came closer to the light. The light was at the edge of the water. Now, if you think about this as the rounded earth, there might be a little smidge of sun showing. If you're a Native American long ago and you did not have science telling you why you saw this little bit of light but the sun wasn't rising, you might come up with a story for why that's happening, huh? Remember that a lot of Native American legends were used to explain why things were as they were. The light came from the house of the Sky Chief, and it was shining. Raven perched high in a pine tree on the shore. Raven watched. He saw a beautiful young girl emerge from the shining house and go to the edge of the water. She was the Sky Chief's daughter. She knelt and drank some water from a woven basket. Raven changed himself into a pine needle. He fell down from the tree and floated on the water. When the girl drank again, she swallowed the pine needle. After a time, the girl gave birth to a child. The child was small and dark with shiny black hair and tiny black eyes. Who do you think the child was? Do you know? It was Raven. Raven had been reborn as a boy child. The Sky Chief was delighted with his daughter's child. He called him grandchild. He played with the boy and carved toys for him. He invited the elders to come and see the curious, wonderful child. The elders gathered in the shining house of the Sky Chief and his daughter. They watched Raven Child crawl around the floor of the lodge. He pretended to be playing. All the time, he was trying to find where the light was hidden. He saw a box in the corner of the lodge. I like how the Sky Chief's face looks kind of like the sun, doesn't it? The box was large. It was carved and painted with many colors. The box was bright. It glowed. Raven Child said, "Gaga!" "What do you want?" asked his mother. Raven Child said, "Gaga!" He began to cry. "What does the child want?" asked the elders. Raven Child said, "Gaga!" He cried and cried. "My grandchild wants the box," said the Sky Chief. The young woman placed the box in front of Raven Child, but he continued to cry. She took the lid off the box. Inside was a smaller box. She took the lid off that box. Inside was a smaller box. His mother took the lid off that box, and light poured out of it. Light flooded the room. Inside the box was a shining ball, blazing with light. What do you think the ball was? It was the sun. "Give him the ball," said the Sky Chief. Now we know that that would be dangerous, but it's just a story. His mother gave Raven Child the ball. Raven Child stopped crying. He began to play with it. He rolled it around the floor of the lodge. "Gaga!" Then he changed into a bird. "Ha ha!" He became a raven once again. "Caw, caw!" Sky Chief, his daughter, and the elders looked on in amazement. Raven plucked up the ball of light in his beak, flew through the smoke hole of the lodge, and disappeared into the dark sky. Raven flew over the valleys and the mountains. He flew along the rivers and across the lakes. Raven threw the sun high in the sky, and it stayed there. That is how Raven stole the sun and gave it to all the people. And why do the people always feed Raven? To thank him for bringing them light. This book is by Gerald McDermott. He does a lot of Native American trickster stories, a lot of their legends. So a couple of things that I want to make sure that you guys noticed about this. And a couple of sciencey things that we should probably know. Oh, I should have had my marker over here. Let me grab a marker real fast. So, all right, so if this is the sun, and just say this is Earth and this is Earth at another time of the year. Earth is orbiting around the sun. It goes all the way around. Now, sometimes the north is the top of the planet, south is the bottom, but it sits at an angle in the sky. and some are in space. Sometimes the North Pole is pointed away from the sun. And when the North Pole is pointed away from the sun, there is no sunlight during that time. And sometimes the North Pole is pointed at the sun, and then it does get sun. Sometimes all year round. The Earth is spinning around, which is making day and night, but when you're at the top or the bottom, even though the Earth is spinning, you're still kind of facing the sun or facing away from the sun. When we have June, it's our summer solstice. In the middle of June is a day called the summer solstice. That day has the most daylight of any day in the year. That means that you have sunshine longer than any other day of the year. But after the solstice, the days start getting a little shorter and shorter and shorter and shorter. You're taking a little off the beginning and a little off the end, just a couple minutes here and a couple minutes here, until there's more darkness than there is light. December, the very last month of the year, in the middle of the month, you have the winter solstice. And a lot of people call that the return of the sun, because once the winter solstice starts, the days start getting a little longer. Now, they don't just all of a sudden have a lot of daylight, but they do start getting longer, and they stop getting shorter and shorter. Your day gets a little more light in the beginning or in the end, just gets a little bit longer, until you get to June, the longest day of the year, and then they start getting shorter and shorter and shorter. And that's all caused by how the Earth tilts away or toward the sun, depending on where you are. So if I lived in Alaska or one of those very far north countries, I would probably be thinking a lot about, why is it dark in the winter? Why is there so much darkness? And I think that the Native American tribes that tell stories of the raven stealing the sun are trying to explain that. I also thought it would be really cool to look at where they lived. If you look, they do have trees. They don't live in teepees. This tribe has lodges. A lot of the northwest parts of the United States, the Native American tribes built buildings out of wood. They have trees. They're also really well known for totem poles. Those are basically carved animals stacked on top of each other. They tell stories or honor famous, and they honor animals and famous people in their tribe. So totem poles are kind of something that they worship and that they look to as part of their faith, and they live in these wooden houses. Anyway, it's a lot of information, but I really like the story of the raven because I am very tuned in to when the sun is out. I really like it when the sun is coming back. So every December, when we have the winter solstice, I feel very joyful and excited that we're having the return of the sun, that the days are starting to get longer. It makes me feel very good inside. And for some reason, every June when we have the summer solstice and I know that the days are starting to get shorter, I feel a little sorrow or sadness inside because I know that the darkness is coming. For some of us, that's a sad time. We don't like the darkness, and I don't know if you do or you don't, but it's just something that you notice when you get older. So I hope you enjoyed the story of the raven. We're going to read more legends this week, and I'll talk to you soon.